I watched from my kitchen window as 3 HOA board members marched across my property line with a landscaping crew in tow, and that's when I knew my peaceful morning coffee was about to turn into a war. The view from my house in Bend, Oregon, had been the entire reason I'd bought the place 2 years ago, an unobstructed panorama of the Cascade Mountains that took my breath away every single morning. Now, these people were about to destroy it. My name is Isaac Thompson, and I'm a software engineer who works from home. I'd saved for years to buy this property, a modest 3-bedroom house on the edge of the Ponderosa Pines subdivision. The lot was slightly elevated, which gave me that $1 million view without the $1 million price tag. At least, that's what I thought when I signed the papers. I set down my coffee mug and headed outside, my bare feet hitting the cold deck boards. It was early May, and the morning air still had that crisp bite to it. The landscaping truck had parked right at the edge of what I knew was my property, and a woman with severely highlighted blonde hair was directing the workers with aggressive hand gestures. "Excuse me," I called out, walking down my driveway. "What's going on here?" The woman turned, and I immediately recognized her from the HOA meetings I'd been forced to attend. Patricia Vandermeer, the HOA president, a woman in her late 40s who seemed to believe that her position gave her absolute authority over everyone in the neighborhood. She wore a white tennis visor despite the overcast sky, and her lips were pressed into that tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Good morning, Isaac," she said in that saccharine voice that made my skin crawl. "We're just implementing the new beautification initiative that was approved at last month's meeting." "The meeting I couldn't attend because I was in Seattle for work," I said, crossing my arms, "and this looks like it's on my property." Patricia's smile grew even tighter. "Actually, this is HOA common area. According to our surveys, the property line extends 15 feet from your fence." I felt my jaw clench. "That's not correct. I had a survey done before I bought this place. The property line is exactly where my fence is. This is my land." One of the workers, a young guy in his 20s, glanced between us nervously, his shovel hanging in mid-air. Behind them, I could see 6 large evergreen trees on a flatbed truck, each one at least 15 feet tall. They weren't small decorative trees. These were massive Ponderosa pines that would block my entire view within a year or two. "I have the official HOA survey right here," Patricia said, pulling out a rolled document from her designer handbag. "Signed by a licensed surveyor. Perhaps you should have your documents reviewed." "I will," I said firmly. "But until then, nobody plants anything. These workers need to leave." Patricia's expression shifted from fake pleasant to ice cold in an instant. "These workers are doing their job as contracted by the HOA. The beautification initiative was voted on and approved. If you have concerns, you can bring them up at the next board meeting in 3 weeks." 3 weeks? You'll have those trees planted and destroying my view by then. This stops now." Patricia stepped closer to me, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Mr. Thompson, you seem to forget that you signed the HOA covenants when you purchased your home. Those covenants give us the authority to maintain and improve common areas. If you interfere with HOA business, we can fine you up to $500 per day. Is that really what you want?" I stared at her for a long moment, weighing my options. The workers were already digging holes, the mechanical auger tearing into the earth. Each hole was perfectly positioned to block a section of my view. This wasn't random, this was calculated. "Plant those trees and you'll regret it," I said quietly. Patricia laughed, actually laughed. "Is that a threat, Mr. Thompson? Because I can have our attorney add threatening behavior to your file." I turned and walked back to my house, my heart pounding. Inside, I immediately went to my office and pulled out the survey documents from my filing cabinet. The paperwork was clear. The property line was exactly where I'd said it was. My lot extended all the way to the natural drainage ditch that ran along the back of the property. There was no 15-foot common area. I grabbed my phone and called my real estate attorney, David Chen. He'd helped me with the purchase, and I trusted him completely. "David, it's Isaac Thompson. I need you to look at something urgently. The HOA is planting trees on my property, claiming it's common area, but I have survey documents that say otherwise." David's voice was calm and professional. "Send me everything you have, your survey, deed, and any documents the HOA provided. I'll review them this morning and call you back." I scanned and emailed everything while watching through my window as the workers planted the first tree. They worked efficiently, clearly experienced. Within an hour, 3 trees were in the ground, already blocking the northern section of my mountain view. I took photographs from every angle, documenting the exact locations and making notes of the time. David called back around noon. "Isaac, your survey is correct. I also pulled the county records, and there's no question that land is yours. The HOA's survey document appears to be falsified. The signature belongs to a surveyor who retired 5 years ago and moved to Florida. I already called him, and he confirms he never did any work for the Ponderosa Pines HOA." I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. So they're trespassing and planting trees on my property with fake documents. That's exactly what they're doing. I'm drafting a cease and desist letter right now. I'll have it delivered this afternoon. But Isaac, here's what you need to know. Even with the letter, they might continue. HOAs can be incredibly stubborn, especially when the board has unchecked power. You need to be prepared for a fight. "I'm prepared," I said. "What are my options?" "If they continue after receiving the cease and desist, you have the legal right to remove the trees. They're on your property without permission. You can also sue for trespassing, property damage, and the cost of restoration. But I'd recommend trying the legal route first. Give them a chance to back down. And if they don't? Then you remove the trees and send them the bill, but document everything: photos, videos, witnesses if possible. Make sure you follow the law to the letter." By the time David's cease and desist letter was delivered at 3 in the afternoon, all 6 trees were planted. I watched Patricia's face as she read the letter on my front lawn, standing exactly on the property line. Her expression cycled through surprise, anger, and then settled on smug defiance. She marched up to my door and rang the bell hard enough that I heard it from my office. I took my time walking to the door, letting her stew. "This is ridiculous," she said, waving the letter at me. "You're wasting everyone's time and money with this nonsense. Our survey is legitimate. Your survey is signed by a man who retired 5 years ago and confirms he never worked for this HOA. That's fraud, Patricia. I strongly suggest you remove those trees before this gets worse." Her face flushed red. "Those trees are staying exactly where they are. And since you want to play games, the board will be discussing additional fines for your property at our emergency meeting tonight. Your grass is 1/4 inch above regulation height. Your garbage bins were visible from the street last Tuesday. And your house number is the wrong shade of black. You're making that up." "Prove it," she said with a vicious smile. "The fines start at $250 each. That's $750, Mr. Thompson. And there will be more if you continue this hostile behavior toward the board." She turned and walked away before I could respond. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of what I was up against. This wasn't just about trees anymore. Patricia was going to use every petty rule in the HOA handbook to punish me for challenging her authority. I called David back. "They're not removing the trees, and now they're threatening me with fake violations and fines." "Document everything," David repeated. "Every communication, every fine notice. We'll need it all. In the meantime, I'm filing a complaint with the county about the fraudulent survey. That could open them up to criminal charges if we can prove they knowingly used false documents." That night, I barely slept. I kept looking out my window at those 6 trees standing like sentinels, blocking the view I'd worked so hard to afford. The next morning, I made my decision. I was done playing their game. I called a local tree removal company, Mountain View Tree Services. The owner, a straightforward guy named Randy, came out that afternoon to give me an estimate. "Those are new plantings," he observed, walking around the trees. "Somebody just put these in. The HOA planted them on my property without permission. I have survey documents proving this is my land, and they've refused to remove them after receiving a cease and desist letter." Randy nodded slowly. "I've dealt with HOA situations before. Nasty business. You're sure about the property line? Because if there's any question, I can't do the work." "I'm certain. My attorney confirmed it. I have all the documentation." "Then I can have a crew here tomorrow morning. For all 6 trees, plus disposal and stump grinding, I'm looking at $3,500. It was a lot of money, but it was worth it. Do it. Randy's crew arrived at 7 the next morning, and I made sure to be outside with my camera, recording everything. The sound of chainsaws echoed through the neighborhood, and within minutes, I saw Patricia's white Mercedes come screeching around the corner. She jumped out of her car, not even bothering to close the door. "Stop! Stop immediately! You're destroying HOA property!" Randy, to his credit, didn't even pause. "Madam, you need to step back. This is a work zone." "I'm calling the police," Patricia shrieked, her face purple with rage. "This is vandalism, destruction of property." "Call them," I said calmly, still recording. "I'll be happy to show them my property survey and the cease and desist letter your HOA ignored." The first tree came down with a satisfying crash, well away from any structures. Randy's crew worked like a well-oiled machine, sectioning the tree and feeding it into a wood chipper. Patricia was on her phone, pacing back and forth. "Yes, I need police at 847 Cascade View Drive immediately. Someone is destroying property. It's an emergency." 2 police officers arrived about 15 minutes later. I recognized one of them, Officer Martinez, from a neighborhood watch meeting. I'd always found him reasonable. "What's going on here?" Martinez asked, looking between Patricia and me. Patricia launched into a dramatic explanation about how I was destroying HOA property, violating covenants, and being hostile to the board. She waved her fake survey around like it was a religious text. When she finally stopped to breathe, Martinez turned to me. "Your side?" I handed him a folder I'd prepared. Complete property survey from a licensed surveyor, my deed showing the property boundaries, and a cease and desist letter delivered to the HOA 2 days ago demanding they remove these trees from my property. They refused. I'm within my legal rights to remove trees that were planted on my land without permission. Martinez reviewed the documents carefully, then looked at Patricia's survey. "Madam, this survey is dated but signed by someone who apparently retired 5 years ago. Do you have any other documentation?" Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "This is the official HOA survey. It's legitimate." "I've already filed a complaint with the county about the fraudulent survey," I added. "My attorney can provide you with confirmation from the surveyor himself that he never did this work." The second officer, whose name tag read Johnson, walked the property line with my survey map. When he came back, he nodded to Martinez. "His survey matches the county records exactly. The trees are on his property." Martinez handed back my documents. "Mr. Thompson is within his rights. Madam, if you have concerns, you'll need to pursue them in civil court. But from what I'm seeing here, this is his property, and he can remove the trees." Patricia looked like she might explode. "This is outrageous. The HOA will sue you for every penny you have." "You're welcome to try," I said. "In the meantime, you'll be receiving an invoice for the removal costs, $3,500 plus legal fees." The police officers left, and Patricia stood on the sidewalk, shaking with fury as Randy's crew systematically removed all 6 trees. It took about 4 hours total. By early afternoon, my view was restored, and the only evidence of the trees was fresh dirt and 6 perfectly ground stumps. Randy handed me the invoice. "All done. We hauled away all the debris. The stumps are ground down 6 inches below grade, so you can plant grass seed over them if you want." I paid him with a check and shook his hand. "Thanks for being professional about this." "No problem. Good luck with your HOA situation. I've seen these things get ugly." He had no idea how right he was. The next day, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a notice of fines totaling $5,000 for various alleged violations, plus an additional $10,000 emergency assessment for the destruction of HOA property. The letter demanded payment within 15 days, or they would place a lien on my property. I forwarded everything to David. He called me within the hour, and I could hear the anger in his usually calm voice. "This is harassment, plain and simple. They're using their position to retaliate against you for exercising your legal property rights. I'm filing a lawsuit against the HOA, the board members individually, and I'm requesting an injunction to prevent any further fines or assessments against you." "How much is this going to cost me?" I asked, feeling the weight of legal bills piling up. "I'm estimating between $10,000 and $15,000 for the full litigation. But Isaac, here's the thing: when we win, and we will win, the HOA will be responsible for your legal fees plus damages. They're so far in the wrong here that I'm confident we'll prevail. And if they can't pay, then the board members may be personally liable, especially if we can prove they knowingly used fraudulent documents and engaged in retaliatory harassment." David filed the lawsuit on a Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, I received an email from Patricia calling an emergency HOA meeting for Wednesday night. The subject line read, "Mandatory attendance for all homeowners, discussion of rogue homeowner." I showed up to that meeting with David beside me. The community clubhouse was packed apparently. Everyone wanted to see the drama unfold. Patricia sat at the head table with the other board members, Treasurer Mark Stevens, a balding accountant in his 50s, and Secretary Denise Fletcher, a nervous woman in her 60s, who seemed to spend the entire meeting avoiding eye contact with everyone. Patricia banged her gavel. "This emergency meeting is called to order. We're here to discuss the hostile and destructive actions of one of our homeowners, Isaac Thompson, who has willfully destroyed HOA property and is now suing the association, which will cost all of us money." A murmur went through the crowd. I saw several neighbors shaking their heads, and I wasn't sure if it was at me or at Patricia. David stood up. "May I address the board?" Patricia's expression soured. "And you are?" "David Chen, Mr. Thompson's attorney. I'd like to clarify the facts since Ms. Vandermeer seems to be misrepresenting the situation." "You have no authority here. This is a closed HOA meeting." Actually, under Oregon HOA law, any homeowner can bring an attorney to represent them at meetings. I suggest you review ORS 94.640. Now, if I may continue, the HOA planted 6 trees on Mr. Thompson's private property using a fraudulent survey document. After being served with a cease and desist letter proving the land was private property, the HOA refused to remove the trees. Mr. Thompson exercised his legal right to remove them. The lawsuit seeks compensation for the removal costs, damages, and legal fees resulting from the HOA's unlawful actions. "That's not true," Patricia snapped. "The survey was legitimate, and the property is common area designated for beautification." David pulled out a stack of papers. "I have here a statement from the surveyor, whose signature appears on your document, confirming he never performed any work for this HOA. I also have county records showing the property boundaries. Would you like me to present these to everyone here?" The room erupted in conversation. Several people started shouting questions at the board. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly, her face turning red. "Order! I will have order!" A man in the back row stood up. I recognized him as Greg Martinez, Officer Martinez's brother, who lived 3 streets over. "Patricia, if what the attorney says is true, you used fake documents to plant trees on someone's private property. That's not just an HOA issue that's fraud, maybe criminal trespassing." "It's a misunderstanding," Mark Stevens said quickly, sweat beading on his forehead. "The board was acting on information we believe to be correct." "Information signed by someone who retired 5 years ago," another neighbor called out. "How does that happen by accident?" Patricia stood up, slamming her hands on the table. "This meeting is about holding Isaac Thompson accountable for his destruction of neighborhood property and his frivolous lawsuit that will drain our reserves. Every homeowner here will see their dues increase because of his selfish actions." "Actually," David said calmly, "when we win the lawsuit, the HOA will pay damages and legal fees. The only way homeowner dues increase is if the board refuses to settle and continues to waste money defending the indefensible. I've already sent a settlement offer. Mr. Thompson will drop the suit if the HOA pays the $3,500 tree removal cost and agrees to cease all retaliatory fines and assessments. That's a bargain compared to what you'll pay if this goes to court." Denise Fletcher, the secretary, finally spoke up in a quiet voice. "Maybe we should consider the settlement. I never felt comfortable with those trees anyway. Isaac's property has such a beautiful view." Patricia's head snapped toward her. "Don't you dare undermine this board, Denise. We vote as a unit." "Actually, each board member votes individually," David corrected. "That's also in the Oregon HOA statutes." The meeting devolved into chaos. Neighbors were shouting at the board, at each other, and at Patricia specifically. Several people approached me to express support, saying they had had their own issues with Patricia's authoritarian approach. One couple told me about being fined $2,000 because their rose bushes were the wrong shade of pink. Patricia eventually gave up trying to restore order and stormed out of the meeting. Mark and Denise remained, looking shell-shocked. After the crowd dispersed, Mark approached David and me. "I think we should settle," he said quietly. "This has gotten out of hand. I didn't know about the survey issues. Patricia handled that part. So you're saying Patricia was solely responsible for the fraudulent survey? David asked, pulling out a notebook. Mark hesitated, clearly realizing he might be implicating the HOA president. I'm saying I never saw the original survey document. Patricia told us it was legitimate, and we trusted her. Over the next 2 weeks, David negotiated with the HOA's attorney. Patricia fought against the settlement, but she'd lost the support of the other board members. Mark and Denise voted to accept the terms. The HOA would pay my $3,500 tree removal bill, $5,000 in legal fees and damages, and all the fake fines would be rescinded. Additionally, Patricia would resign from the board. That last part almost killed the deal. Patricia refused initially, claiming she'd done nothing wrong. But when David pointed out that he was prepared to pursue criminal charges for the fraudulent survey document and that he had Mark's statement about Patricia being solely responsible for it, she finally backed down. The day Patricia's resignation was announced, I was in my kitchen making coffee and watching the sunrise over the Cascade Mountains. My view was completely unobstructed, exactly as it had been when I bought the house. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not just because I'd won, but because I'd stood up to someone who'd been abusing their power for years. But the story didn't end there. 2 days after Patricia's resignation, I received a call from the county prosecutor's office. A woman named Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh wanted to talk to me about the fraudulent survey. I met her at her office in downtown Bend. Jennifer was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and professional, with a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of the best project managers I'd worked with in tech. Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming in. I've been reviewing the complaint your attorney filed regarding the HOA survey. I have some questions. She laid out copies of the fraudulent survey alongside the real one. Do you know who actually created this fake document? Patricia Vandermeer, the former HOA president, was responsible for presenting it to the board. The other members claim they never saw the original. And you believe them? I considered the question carefully. Mark Stevens seemed genuinely surprised when my attorney revealed the issues with the survey. Denise Fletcher always seemed uncomfortable during meetings. I think they were intimidated by Patricia and didn't question her. Jennifer nodded, making notes. We've been looking into Ms. Vandermeer. This isn't the first complaint we've received about her. There have been several reports over the years about HOA abuse, but nothing that rose to the level of criminal charges. This fraudulent document changes things. Forgery is a serious crime in Oregon. What happens now? We're opening an investigation. I can't share details, but I wanted to get your account directly. Your attorney's documentation has been very helpful. I left her office feeling both vindicated and slightly worried. I'd wanted Patricia to stop harassing me, not necessarily to face criminal charges. But as David reminded me when I called him, actions have consequences, especially when someone deliberately falsifies legal documents. 3 weeks later, Patricia was arrested. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. According to the reports, the investigation had uncovered not just the fraudulent survey, but also evidence that Patricia had been embezzling HOA funds for years. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger sums. She'd been using her position to funnel money into a private account, disguising it as payments to contractors and services that never existed. The total amount was over $70,000. I learned most of this from Greg Martinez, who stopped by my house one evening with a 6-pack of craft beer from a local brewery. My brother told me what they found, Greg said, sitting on my deck and admiring the mountain view. Patricia had been running a scheme for at least 4 years. She'd create fake invoices, get the treasurer to approve payments, then deposit them into an account she controlled. The tree situation with your property was just her latest attempt to assert control and distract from what she was really doing. So the trees were never about beautification, I said, the pieces clicking together. They were about putting me in my place because I'd started asking questions about HOA finances at the meetings. Exactly. You were getting too curious. She needed to make an example of you, show everyone what happens when you challenge the board, except it backfired spectacularly. I took a drink of my beer, watching the sun set over the mountains. I just wanted to protect my view. I never thought it would lead to uncovering embezzlement. Sometimes standing up to a bully reveals they're running a whole criminal enterprise. Patricia had everyone so intimidated that nobody questioned her. You were the first person to really fight back." The legal proceedings moved slowly, as they always do. Patricia initially tried to fight the charges, claiming she'd done nothing wrong and that the investigation was retaliation for her aggressive HOA leadership. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, fake invoices, forged signatures, the prosecutor's case was airtight. In the meantime, the HOA held elections for a new board. I considered running, but decided I'd had enough of HOA politics. Instead, a group of younger homeowners took over, including Greg Martinez as president. Their first act was to review and revise all the HOA rules, eliminating the most petty and restrictive ones. The grass height requirement was changed from no more than 3 inches to must be reasonably maintained. The garbage bin visibility rule was eliminated entirely, and the house number color requirement, which had specified Federal Standard 595 black, shade 37038, was changed to simply black or dark gray. It felt like the neighborhood could finally breathe again. 6 months after the trees were removed, Patricia pleaded guilty to forgery, embezzlement, and fraud. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of early release if she made full restitution to the HOA. She was also ordered to pay an additional $15,000 in fines. I attended the sentencing hearing. I felt I owed it to myself to see the conclusion of the situation that had consumed so much of my life. Patricia didn't look at me once during the proceedings. She stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, her highlighted hair now showing dark roots, her face drawn and aged. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, Patricia's voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry for what I did. I never meant for things to go this far." It was the first time I'd heard her sound anything less than absolutely confident in her own righteousness. I didn't feel satisfaction, exactly just a kind of sad relief that it was over. After the hearing, Jennifer Walsh approached me in the courthouse hallway. "Thank you for your cooperation throughout this process. Your willingness to stand up to her made this case possible." "I just wanted to keep my view," I said, repeating what I'd told Greg months earlier. Jennifer smiled slightly. "Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance reveal the biggest crimes. Ms. Vandermeer might have continued stealing from the HOA for years if you hadn't challenged her authority." The new HOA board worked with attorneys to recover what they could of the embezzled funds. Patricia's house had to be sold, along with her Mercedes and most of her other assets. The HOA recovered about $40,000, which was used to replenish the reserve fund and make some long overdue repairs to the community facilities. As for me, I received a formal apology from the HOA and a check for $8,500 covering my tree removal costs, legal fees, and additional damages for the harassment I'd endured. More importantly, I got to keep my view. But the experience changed me in ways I didn't expect. I became more involved in the neighborhood, not in HOA politics, but in building actual community. I organized a monthly poker game that rotated between houses. I started a neighborhood watch program that was actually about neighbors watching out for each other, not enforcing petty rules. I also became something of a go-to person for homeowners in other neighborhoods dealing with HOA problems. Word spread about my situation, and I'd regularly get emails or calls from people asking for advice on how to fight unreasonable HOA demands. My standard advice was always the same: document everything, know your property rights, and don't be afraid to hire an attorney if the HOA violates the law. Most HOA boards operate within reasonable bounds, I'd explain, but when you encounter one that doesn't, standing up to them is essential not just for you, but for everyone in the community. A year after the trees were removed, I was sitting on my deck on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, watching the mountains turn pink in the dawn light. My neighbor to the south, an elderly woman named Margaret, who'd lived in the neighborhood for 20 years, walked over with her dog. "Morning, Isaac," she said. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" "Not at all." I gestured to the empty chair beside me. Margaret sat down with a sigh, her old golden retriever settling at her feet. "I wanted to thank you. I know I never said it properly before. But what you did standing up to Patricia, it freed all of us. I was so tired of living in fear of fines and violations. Toward the end, I was afraid to even plant flowers in my own yard without checking the HOA rules first. You don't have to thank me. I was just protecting my property. Maybe, Margaret said with a knowing smile, but sometimes one person's fight for their own rights ends up helping everyone. The neighborhood is different now, better. People actually talk to each other instead of reporting each other for violations. She was right. I'd noticed it too. The community had softened, become more neighborly. People waved when they drove by. Kids played in the streets without their parents worrying about noise complaints. The whole atmosphere had shifted. Margaret continued, I heard from Denise Fletcher that Patricia used to keep a notebook of every potential violation she spotted. She'd drive around the neighborhood in the evening, writing down license plate numbers of visitors who stayed past 10 p.m., measuring grass height with a ruler, taking photos of anything that might be even slightly against the rules. It was like living under surveillance. I'm glad that's over. Me too. Margaret stood up, her dog automatically rising with her. Anyway, I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered. To all of us. After she left, I sat thinking about Patricia. I'd painted her as a villain in my mind, but she was more complicated than that. Somewhere along the way, she'd convinced herself that strict rule enforcement and absolute authority were the same as good leadership. She'd probably started with good intentions, wanting to keep the neighborhood nice, but had gradually corrupted herself with unchecked power. The embezzlement had likely started small too. Maybe she took a little money to compensate herself for the time she spent on HOA business. Then it grew, and she convinced herself she deserved it. By the time she was stealing thousands of dollars a year, she was too deep in to stop. The trees on my property were just another expression of that corruption and abuse of power that she'd gotten away with so many times before that she never thought it would be challenged. I finished my coffee and went inside to start my workday. My home office overlooked the mountains, and I never got tired of that view. It reminded me every day why I'd fought so hard. The rest of that year passed peacefully. The new HOA board proved to be reasonable and responsive. When my next-door neighbor wanted to paint his house a slightly different shade of tan than was technically approved, the board looked at the sample, agreed it was attractive, and updated the approved color list. No drama, no fines. Just common sense. I paid my quarterly HOA dues without resentment, knowing the money was actually going toward neighborhood maintenance and improvements rather than into Patricia's private account. But I never forgot the lesson I'd learned. When someone in authority abuses their power, the only way to stop them is to stand up and fight back, even when it's difficult, even when it costs money and time and stress. Because if you don't, the abuse only gets worse. The following spring, I decided to plant some trees on my property, but this time, they were decorative Japanese maples positioned to frame my view rather than block it. I was out in my yard, digging the first hole, when Greg Martinez walked over. Need help? He asked. Sure, grab a shovel. We worked together in comfortable silence for a while. Then Greg said, You know, we've been getting inquiries from other HOAs in Bend about our new governance model. Apparently, word is spread about what happened with Patricia, and some communities are realizing they have similar problems. They want to know how we reformed our rules and board structure. That's good, I said, patting soil around the base of the maple. Maybe something positive can come out of the whole mess. I was thinking, Greg continued, maybe you could help put together a guide or handbook for homeowners dealing with HOA issues. You've been helping people informally anyway. This could reach more people. I considered it. The idea appealed to me, turning my negative experience into something useful for others. I'd need to partner with someone who knows the legal side better than I do. I bet David Chen would help. He's mentioned to me that he's gotten a lot of new clients because of your case. HOA law is becoming a specialty for him. That's how the Homeowner Rights Handbook project started. David and I spent the next 6 months compiling information about property rights, HOA laws in Oregon, documentation best practices, and resources for homeowners facing unreasonable boards. We interviewed other attorneys, homeowners who'd fought HOA battles, and even some reasonable HOA board members who wanted to see better governance in their communities. We published it as a free PDF online, and within weeks, it had been downloaded thousands of times. We started getting thank you emails from people all over Oregon, and even from other states, saying the handbook had helped them stand up to HOA overreach. One email particularly stuck with me. It was from a woman in Portland whose HOA had tried to force her to remove a wheelchair ramp installed for her disabled daughter, claiming it violated the aesthetic requirements. Using the documentation and legal strategies outlined in our handbook, she fought back and won. The HOA not only let her keep the ramp but changed their rules to explicitly allow accessibility modifications. "Your guide gave me the courage and knowledge to fight," she wrote. "Thank you for turning your experience into something that helps others." That was when I realized the 6 trees Patricia had planted on my property had been a blessing in disguise. If she hadn't overreached so dramatically, I might have just grumbled about high HOA dues and petty rules like everyone else. I never would have uncovered the embezzlement, never would have stood up to her, and never would have helped create positive change that extended far beyond my own property. 2 years after the trees were removed, I was featured in a local newspaper article about HOA reform in Oregon. The reporter interviewed me on my deck, with the mountain view prominently featured in the photos. "Do you have any regrets about how you handled the situation?" the reporter asked. I thought about it carefully. No, I wish I hadn't needed to handle it at all. I wish Patricia had just been a reasonable HOA president. But once the situation developed, I did what I had to do. I protected my property rights, and in the process, I helped protect everyone else in my neighborhood from an abusive board member. Some people say you could have been more diplomatic, that you escalated unnecessarily. I tried diplomacy, I reminded her. I sent a cease and desist letter. I offered to discuss the property line dispute. Patricia refused every attempt at reasonable resolution because she was used to getting her way through intimidation. Sometimes you can't compromise with someone who's fundamentally unwilling to respect your rights. The article ran with the headline, "How One Homeowner's Stand Against His HOA Sparked Reform Across Bend." It included details about Patricia's arrest and conviction, the HOA's transformation under new leadership, and the broader impact on HOA governance discussions in the area. I got a few nasty messages after the article published, mostly from HOA board members in other communities who felt I'd made their jobs harder by encouraging homeowners to question authority. But I got far more messages of support and gratitude. Life gradually returned to normal. I continued my software engineering work, enjoyed my mountain view, and stayed involved in the neighborhood in a healthy, non-dramatic way. The poker games continued, and I started dating a woman named Teresa Bradford who lived 2 neighborhoods over. She had her own HOA horror stories, and we bonded over shared experiences of bureaucratic absurdity. Teresa was a veterinarian, practical and warm, with a sharp sense of humor. She dealt with her own HOA battle a few years earlier when they tried to prohibit her from keeping chickens in her backyard, despite local ordinances allowing it. "I swear some HOA board members forget that they're volunteers managing a neighborhood, not dictators ruling a kingdom," she said over dinner one evening. "It's like the tiny bit of power goes straight to their heads." "Not all of them," I said. "Greg and the current board are doing a great job. They actually see their role as serving the community." "True. I guess it depends on who's in charge and whether there are any checks on their power." We talked about collaborating on an expanded version of the handbook that would cover more states and include a section on fighting specific types of HOA overreach, including pet restrictions, landscaping requirements, and architectural controls. 3 years after the trees were removed, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Patricia. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Part of me wanted to throw it away unread, but curiosity won out. The letter was handwritten, the script shaky and uncertain. Dear Isaac, I am writing to apologize for my actions regarding your property and the trees. I was wrong to plant them without proper verification of the property boundaries. I was wrong to refuse to remove them when you provided proof they were on your land, and I was especially wrong to engage in retaliatory behavior against you. The last 3 years have given me a lot of time to think about how I abused my position as HOA president. I convinced myself I was acting in the best interests of the community, but really I was acting out of pride and a need for control. When you challenged me, I saw it as a personal attack rather than a legitimate property rights issue. I know my apology cannot undo the stress and expense I caused you. I also know that the embezzlement charges revealed my deeper betrayal of the community's trust. I am working to make restitution as part of my sentence, though I know money cannot fully repair the damage I did. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for a response. I simply wanted you to know that I recognize how wrong I was, and that your decision to stand up to me, while it cost me everything, was ultimately the right thing to do. I needed to be stopped, even though I couldn't see it at the time. I hope you are enjoying your home and your view. I'm sorry I tried to take that from you. Sincerely, Patricia Vandermeer. I read the letter 3 times, trying to process my feelings. There was satisfaction in the apology, but also a strange sadness. Patricia had destroyed her own life through arrogance and greed, and while the consequences were appropriate, they were also tragic. I showed the letter to Teresa that evening. She read it carefully, then set it down on my kitchen table. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I don't know. Vindicated, I guess, but also, I don't know, it's complicated. You can feel multiple things at once. You can be glad you stood up to her and also feel sad about how her life turned out. I never wanted to ruin her life. I just wanted to keep my view. You didn't ruin her life. She did that herself. You just refused to be her victim." Teresa was right, as she usually was. I filed the letter away in the folder with all the other documents from that period, a reminder of how a simple property dispute had spiraled into something much larger. 4 years after the trees were removed, the Ponderosa Pines HOA held a neighborhood barbecue, something that had never happened under Patricia's regime. The whole community showed up, and it felt genuinely warm and friendly. Kids ran around playing, adults mingled and laughed, and the new board served hamburgers and hot dogs without once mentioning property violations or fines. I stood with Teresa, watching the sunset over the mountains, and felt genuinely grateful for where I'd ended up. Yes, I'd gone through stress and expense and conflict, but I'd also learned important lessons about standing up for what's right, about community, and about the importance of accountability in positions of power. Greg Martinez clinked a beer bottle against mine. "To property rights and reasonable HOA boards," he toasted. "I'll drink to that," I said. As the evening wore on and the party continued around us, I thought about all the ways the neighborhood had changed since that morning when I'd watched Patricia march onto my property with a landscaping crew. The transformation wasn't just about removing trees or changing board members. It was about shifting the entire culture from one of fear and control to one of mutual respect and actual community. Several of the neighbors had told me over the years that I should be proud of what I'd accomplished. I always felt uncomfortable with that praise, since I'd just been defending my own property. But standing there at the barbecue, watching people who'd been afraid to talk to each other under Patricia's rule now laughing together, I finally understood what they meant. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone. The view from my house remained unobstructed. Those 6 trees nothing but a memory and a story I told at dinner parties. The mountain vista continued to take my breath away every morning, a constant reminder of why I'd fought so hard and what I'd gained in the process. And whenever I looked out at those mountains, I remembered that property rights matter. The documentation is crucial, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to back down when you're in the right. The trees Patricia planted to block my view had been removed, but the lessons from that experience would stay with me forever. 5 years after the initial conflict, I was finally able to look back on the entire experience with something close to peace. The neighborhood thrived under reasonable governance. My relationship with Teresa was strong. We'd moved in together, combining our households and our occasional chickens, and generally building a life together. The Homeowner Rights Handbook had helped hundreds of people stand up to HOA overreach in their own communities. And every single morning, I sat on my deck with my coffee, watched the sunrise paint the Cascade Mountains in shades of gold and pink, and felt deeply grateful that I'd stood my ground on that day when Patricia Vandermeer had tried to take my view away. She'd planted 6 trees on my land without permission, refused to remove them when confronted with proof of her mistake, and forced me into a legal battle. I'd removed every one of those trees legally, Sent her the bill, and in doing so, I'd uncovered corruption, sparked reform, and helped my community heal from years of authoritarian HOA governance. The trees were gone, Patricia was paying for her crimes, and my view, that spectacular, irreplaceable view that had made me fall in love with this property in the first place, remained exactly as it should be. Unobstructed and mine.